So we are supposed to start from here, but we'll take it back 3 pages. Yeah. Realizing pure consciousness. Is presence the same as being? When you become conscious of being, what is really happening in that being becomes conscious of itself. When being becomes conscious of itself, that's presence. Since being, consciousness, and life are synonymous, we could say that presence means consciousness becoming conscious of itself, or life attaining self-consciousness. But don't get attached to the words and don't make an effort to understand this. There is nothing that you need to understand before you can become present. I understand what you just said, but it seems to imply that being the ultimate transcendental reality is not yet complete, that it is undergoing a process of development. Does God need time for personal growth? Yes, but only as seen from the limited perspective of the manifested universe. In the Bible, God declares, I am the Alpha and the Omega, and I am the living one. In the timeless realm where God dwells, which is also your home, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega are all, and the essence of everything that has been and ever will be is eternally present in an unmanifested state of oneness and perfection, totally beyond the human mind can ever imagine or comprehend. In our world of seemingly separate forms, however, timeless perfection is an inconceivable concept. Here, even consciousness, which is the light emanating from the eternal source, seems to be subject to a process of development. But this is due to our limited perception. It is not so in absolute terms. Nevertheless, let me continue to speak for a moment about the evolution of consciousness in this world. So, it's important not to go into the depth of the meanings of these words. Now, there is a reason why. Because once you start analyzing all these words for their literal sense, the mind is definitely going to, get its hold on it and twist and turn a lot of events. So basic reality, realizing what is pure consciousness is when the consciousness is conscious of itself. When I am conscious, when I know who I am, because we have identified now that I am not this body and I am not this mind. So that question, who am I, is still there. So, and today's meditation is on about realizing and discovering who am I. So that's why it's a very powerful meditation. So once we get to that sphere of knowing who we truly are, and then being conscious of who we truly are, that is realizing pure consciousness. Consciousness inside of us is be aware of the being which is also inside of us. In the oneness, all are the same. But due to our limited perception of the higher realms of consciousness, which definitely we will be covering in the entire book, and a lot of clarity would be there after this meditation. And there are lots of other meditations also. If I get my hands on, I'll definitely share on discovering who am I. So that discovery part is very important. So once you get to that discovery, or once you get, I like Muji puts it, inquiry into who am I, then you start realizing, and then you're at a different, probably a step further from your limited perception on this current stage, of our spiritual journey, and on this current stage of the book itself, because the book is also going to take you there. Slowly and gradually, it is going to take you there only. Everything that exists has being, has God's essence, has some degree of consciousness. Even a stone has rudimentary consciousness, otherwise, it would not be, and its atoms and molecules would disperse. Everything is alive. The sun, the plant, animals, humans, all are expression of consciousness in varying degrees. Consciousness manifesting as form. The world arises when consciousness takes on shapes and forms, thought forms and material forms. Look at the millions of life forms on this planet alone, in the sea, on land, in the air. And then each life form is replicated millions of times. To what end? Is someone or something playing a game with form? This is what the ancient seers of India asked themselves. They saw the world as Leela, a kind of a divine game that God is playing. The individual life forms are obviously not very important in this game. In the sea, most life forms don't survive for more than a few minutes after being born. The human form turns to dust pretty quickly too. But when it's gone, it is as if it had never been. Is that tragic or cruel? Only if you create a separate identity for each form. If you forget that its consciousness is God essence expressing itself in form, but you don't truly know that until you realize your own God essence as pure consciousness. If a fish is born in your aquarium and you call it John, write out a birth certificate and tell him about his family history, and 2 minutes later he gets eaten by another fish, that's tragic. But it's only tragic because you projected a separate self where there was none. You got hold of a fraction of a dynamic process, a molecular dance, and made a separate entity out of it. So when we are born on planet Earth, on school of Earth, we are born in a family. So we are given that family surname, and parents, grandparents, or elders of the family decide a name, and that becomes labeled as our identity. That's the first label on you when you are born. You are so and so. The family surname, parents or elders give you a name, and you start to live that identity the day your name is kept or the day you're born. Whereas when you realize your true self, when you realize who you are, and when you realize who you truly are without this name, without this surname, without this body, and without this mind, then you realize the connection you have with each one of us. in connection you have with that source and the connection you have with that oneness of life. So oneness of life simply means all are one. All are part of this one consciousness called God's essence. That is the oneness. ये सब लेबल बने हुए हैं कि हम, मेरा ये नाम है, मेरा ये फैमिली सरनेम मुझे मिला, ये मुझे बॉडी मिली, ये मुझे माइंड मिला. But where we get to that true connection to who we truly are and how we are connected with all, how we are connected with that source, is when you get to the realization of the oneness inside of us, or the true God's essence, the pure consciousness that is inside of us, which is there inside of us, in animals, in stones, in crystals, everywhere. Anything and everything on planet Earth is one, is connected to that one source. It
So
is
Arjun,
just,
does this, sorry, I'll wait for you to finish.
it's just that when we give it an identity in terms of a form, so that identity, that form is given to the individual. That is not him. It is given to, the name is given to that form, which is part of the uniform, which is part of the mind, which is part of the label which was given to you at birth. But for this, you need to first truly realize and connect with who you truly are. That is when you will be able to feel that connection with that source, feel that connection with that oneness. Yes, Supriya.
So it's quite uncanny. I had this question in my mind about oneness, and I had thought I'll ask you today to explain about oneness. So I don't know how it came. But I wanted to understand, does this mean that all, whether it's my consciousness, your being, my being, everybody else's being, they merge into one? So are you saying that uh, you and Ruchi are, I mean, everyone, every single person we know is actually, like, I really needed to understand that, does this mean that we are one consciousness, all of us? Is just that because we have manifested, the consciousness is manifested in different physical forms, and hence an identity has been attached to it, a mind has been given to it. So is that the
The other
differentiation?
way around. The pure
Sorry.
consciousness, जब हम आते हैं, उसको आइडेंटिटी दी जाती है, उसको एक बॉडी मिलती है, उसको एक नाम मिलता है, उसको एक और मिलता है. सो फर्स्ट इट इज प्योर कॉन्शियसनेस. फिर उसके ऊपर हर एक आइडेंटिटी लेबलिंग की लेयर्स होती है, फिर हम बाद में वो लेयर्स निकालते हैं. Say, I'll ask you one question. Now, this answer to your question is another question. When you throw out, we inhale oxygen and we exhale carbon dioxide. Can you make the distinction which plant took my carbon dioxide and which plant did not take my carbon dioxide? This oxygen is coming from which plant, or this oxygen is coming from where, and this is my oxygen, this is not the other person's oxygen. Is there an answer to that? Because the entire molecules of air available to us are all the same. It is just a matter of realization. So now this is where you go deep inside and you get connected to that true self of yours. So this realization is an individualistic journey.
Very nicely explained, Arjun, honestly.
So this realization is an individualistic journey. It will happen. You can't force it. You can be aware of it. You can practice. But once you get there, then yes, the more you practice, the more you are connected to that source. It's like getting your you have your charger connected, but firstly the power supply on nahi thi, to charge kaise honge? So we are just trying to connect the dots and switch on the power source. And then with practice and with, the power flowing, it'll help us recharge. So it is again a very, very individualistic realization and a very individualistic practice. You will see this in today's meditation. So wait for the meditation. If you have a question on this concept of who I am, or if you have a question on oneness, because I don't know why oneness came to me. I never wanted to explain it, but somehow you had manifested it, so it came through me. So things
Yeah,
are
I
at play.
wanted to ask it yesterday also. I think, and I had forgotten कि मुझे पूछना क्या था. So,
पूरी बुक में
yeah.
मैं हर रोज वननेस बोलता हूँ. मैंने आज तक कभी वननेस का मीनिंग नहीं एक्सप्लेन किया. It happened today. It was meant to be. Chill. Consciousness takes on the disguise of forms until they reach such complexity that it completely loses itself in them. In present day humans, consciousness is completely identified with its disguise. It only knows itself as form and therefore lives in fear of the annihilation of its physical or psychological form. This is the egoic mind. And this is where considerable dysfunction sets in. It now looks as if something had gone very wrong somewhere along the line of evolution. But even this is a part of Leela, the divine game. Finally, the pressure of suffering created by this apparent dysfunction forces consciousness to disidentify from form and awakens it from its dream of form. It regains self-consciousness, but it is at a far deeper level than when it lost it. This process is explained by Jesus in his parable of the lost son who leaves his father's home, squanders his wealth, becomes destitute, and is then forced by his suffering to return home. When he does, his father loves him more than before. The son's state is the same as it was before, yet not the same. It has an added dimension of depth. The parable describes a journey from unconscious perfection through apparent imperfection and evil to conscious perfection. Can you see the deeper and wider significance of becoming present as the watcher of your mind? Whenever you watch the mind, you withdraw consciousness from mind forms, which then becomes what we call the watcher or the witness. Consequently, the watcher, pure consciousness beyond form, becomes stronger and the mental formation becomes weaker. When we talk about watching the mind, we are personalizing an event that is truly of cosmic significance. Through you, consciousness is awakening out of its dream of identification with form and withdrawing from form. This foreshadows, but is already part of an event that is probably still in the distant future as far as chronological time is concerned. The event is called end of the world. So it is all about becoming a witness. So pure consciousness is nothing but the deep source और ये जो हमारी एक जर्नी है स्पिरिचुअल एनलाइटनमेंट की, दैट जर्नी is to dive deep down inside of us to get connected to that source where the association with form is not there. So the main difference of whatever is outside has a form, has a label, has an identity, whereas whatever is inside is formless. It is just an experience, and deep down is just the state of being without any form. That is pure consciousness at play. When consciousness frees itself from its identification with physical and mental forms, it becomes what we may call pure or enlightened consciousness or presence. This has already happened in a few individuals, and it seems destined to happen soon on a much larger scale. Although there is no absolute guarantee that it will happen, most humans are still in the grip of the egoic mode of consciousness, identified with their mind and run by their mind. If they do not free themselves from their mind, in time they will be destroyed by it. They will experience increasing confusion, conflict, violence, illness, despair, madness. Egoic mind has become like a sinking ship. If you don't get off, you will go down with it. The collective egoic mind is the most dangerously insane and destructive entity ever to inhabit this planet. What do you think will happen on this planet if human consciousness remains unchanged? Already, for most humans, the only respite they find from their own minds is to occasionally revert to a level of consciousness below thought. Everyone does that every night during sleep, but this also happens to some extent through sex, alcohol, and other drugs that suppress excessive mind activity. If it weren't for alcohol, tranquilizers, antidepressants, as well as the illegal drugs, which are all consumed in vast quantities, the insanity of the human mind would become even more glaringly obvious than it is already. I believe that if deprived of their drugs, a large part of the population would become a danger to themselves and others. These drugs, of course, simply keep you stuck in dysfunction. Their widespread use only delays the breakdown of the old mind structures and the emergence of higher consciousness. While individual users may get some relief from the daily torture inflicted on them by their minds, they are prevented from generating enough conscious presence to rise above thought and so find true liberation. Falling back to a level of consciousness below mind, which is the pre-thinking level of our distant ancestors and of animals and planet, is not an option for us. There is no way back. If the human race is to survive, it will have to go on to the next stage. Consciousness is evolving through the universe in billions of forms. So even if we didn't make it, this wouldn't matter on a cosmic scale. No gain in consciousness is ever lost. So it would be simply express itself some other form. But the very fact that I'm speaking here and you are listening or reading this is a clear sign that the new consciousness is gaining a foothold on the planet. There is nothing personal in this. I am not teaching you. You are consciousness. You are listening to yourself. There is an Easter saying, the teacher and the taught together create the teaching. In any case, the words in themselves are not important. They are not the truth. They only point to it. I speak from presence. And as I speak, you may be able to join me in that state. Although every word that I use has a history, of course, and comes from the past, as all languages do, the words that I speak to you now are carriers of the high energy frequency of presence, quite apart from the meaning they convey as words. Silence is an even more potent carrier of presence. So when you read this or listen to me speak, be aware of the silence between and underneath the words. Be aware of the gaps. To listen to the silence wherever you are is an easy and direct way of becoming present. Even if there is noise, there is always some silence underneath and in between the sounds. Listening to the silence immediately creates stillness inside you. Only the stillness in you can perceive the silence outside. And what is stillness other than presence? Consciousness freed from thought forms. Here is the living realization of what we have been talking about.